Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Parker, and welcome to the 13th, lucky 13 episode of Antidote. Today we're going to speak with a man who calls himself a crackpot historian, but I think he's much more than that. I consider him a connoisseur of conspiracy cool. He's written half dozen books, numerous, possibly hundreds of articles, and is sometimes known to wear a Mexican wrestling mask in public. His name is Adam Gorightly. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Michael.
It's good to see you, brother. The last time I saw you, I think, was the Nixon Museum in Yorba Linda, California.
Mm-hmm. We had a little get-together. We have a 40-in group, Lo-Fi. Skylar Alfagren runs it, and we have little events now and then. That was to go and try to summon Nixon's ghost, as I recall. Were we successful? I don't remember exactly.
I think the success rate would be could be interpreted various ways.
But yeah, kooky little events like that sometimes. I don't know if afterwards we went to the bowling alley where Discordianism was supposedly discovered in 1958. Were you along for that?
I was not along. The person who actually supposedly was channeling Nixon, I was responsible for giving a ride back to LA, so I did not make it to the bowling alley. Speaking of Discordianism, ladies and gentlemen, we got a story for you. We're going to hang on to that a little bit and talk about that towards the end. But let's cut to the chase. Most recently, I was hesitant to bring this up in the show, but Adam and I were talking beforehand over lunch, and the Roswell Slides situation came up. And you have written a couple of articles regarding the veracity of the Roswell Slides. Tell us a little bit about that. And for the people who don't know, what is all of this Roswell Slide business about?
The first I heard about it was in late 2013. It was a blog post from Nick Redfern. A lot of your viewers might know him. Written tons of books on paranormal UFOs, and he gets people calling him now and then. His number's out there in the public. So he got a call, and this was in early, like February 2013. Somebody asked him, the number was withheld, and the gentleman didn't identify himself, but this guy asked him, how much money could we make off a photo of an alien? And Nick said, well, first of all, you'd have to authenticate the thing, you know? And so that kind of ended. They had a conversation. He never heard from the guy again. Then later in 2013, the story started coming out that there was this Roswell slide of an alien. So that's kind of where the story first started for me. When I heard Roswell attached to it, I went, right. We've seen this movie before. We saw the alien autopsy, and every decade people seem to want to attach any type of story about a crash saucer or those type of things to Roswell. So I pretty much dismissed it until recently it became visible, at least to me again, that they're having this big event in Mexico called Be Witness, where they're going to unveil the slide.
That was May 5th, I believe, right?
Yep.
When I first heard about this, I was doing a radio show, and at the time I said, I believe this was about November of last year, I said at the time, listen, I'm skeptical, but I don't have anything invested in this, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. What I didn't like was the fact that if they had these slides, whatever they were going to wait until early May of the next year to present them. Tell us how that went.
Didn't go well.
Right?
There was a group, and they called themselves, I don't know if they're still calling themselves, the Dream Team, that got involved with the slide. And there's also a film producer named Adam Dew who is working on a movie called Kodachrome about this slide. So this group of investigators were working on this, the Dream Team, and somewhere along the line, a low res of this photo slide got out, but it was, people looked at it, yeah, it's kind of peculiar, but we can't see much with this low res slide. But at this event, the high res slide was shown. And once again, let it be noted, that this Dream Team had a couple of years to look into this slide they claimed they used experts to look at photo analysis experts, and also anthropologists, and they were convinced they had something there. They kept saying this could be the Roswell aliens. So as soon as that event happened, there'd been a group of investigators just a group on Facebook who were also looking at this. And as soon as this event was pay-per-view televised, and somebody grabbed a screenshot of this and they started putting it into software that deblurs. And there was a placard of some sort that the Dream Team said that everybody looked at, they couldn't deblur this. This team, they're calling them the skeptics now, the Roswell Slide research group, within a couple days were able to deblur this, and it said this is the body of a 2-year-old mummy boy.
Right.
Which basically made the whole thing collapse, within a couple of days
immediately
after the Be Witness event, which made a lot of money. I've heard some reports that they had upwards to 8,000 people viewing this on pay-per-view for $20 a shot. So potentially a lot of money could have been made off of this, which some people could interpret as a hoax, a fraud.
Certainly. Well, Jaime Maussan, who was in charge of this, I've met Jaime before, and I was willing to give the guy the benefit of the doubt, but this clearly looks like it's either a hoax or it's incompetence at a very high magnitude, because this is clearly a mummy in some roadshow museum somewhere in the Southwest. But from what I understand from your papers, the believers are coming back hard now and fighting, saying that the placard, that's just misinformation or something.
Mm-hmm. Within a couple of days of the placard deblur, members of the Dream Team started coming out with public apologies, admitting, yeah, this was a mummy, and backing off that was an alien. But the narrative is changing again, and some of them are changing their tune once again. And now they're saying, well, we have scientists that say this is a real dead alien from Roswell, and that the placard deblur was some type of disinformation, even though the team that did the decoding, deciphering, deblur of that got on YouTube and showed them exactly the process they used. And ironically enough, they had pulled the first image they used off of the pay-per-view, just a screen grab. Immediately when the Kodachrome producer got wind of what was going on his website, he said, yeah, they faked the placard to say it's a mummy, and here is the high-res placard which they put on their website. As soon as this slide group, the skeptics, saw that, they said, wow, we got the real deal here. They pulled it off the guy's Kodachrome website, deciphered that, and once again it said this is a 2-year-old mummy. Nonetheless, there's a lot of money invested in this. From what I've heard, Be Witness was the part of a rollout. There was going to be events in the future tied into this Kodachrome movie, potential book project. So a lot of people got a lot invested in this.
Mm-hmm. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that dog don't hunt. That looks to be a mummy of a Native American, and I think that's that. So with that in mind, let's move on. Adam, one thing I enjoy about your work is when you look at conspiracy, you look at it with the prism that I do, which is, frankly, it's kind of fun and entertaining. And much of your work kind of weaves through the Great West, mm-hmm. Golden State and the Southwest. And when you open the book, let me see, where is it? Right there. Happy Trails. This book, Happy Trails to High Weirdness, is the one I've been reading. And this is a bit of many different articles that you've done over your career. And you start off the book talking about California and Southern California. And a lot of people make fun of Florida, but ladies and gentlemen, California's pretty weird too. Talk about
Very
some
weird.
of the cults that are in Southern California that people have not heard of before.
Oh, good heavens. Well, there was a lot of cults actually based out of the Santa Susana area. That's where the Manson family were based out of Spawn Ranch for a while. And really in that same area, going back to the 40s, you had the Krishna Venta group that was in there, and before that, the cult of the Great 11, they called themselves, that were pretty unusual. So there's this long history of cults, good and bad religious orders throughout the Golden State. It's talked about the desert and Joshua Tree in that area where they're having the contact. And the desert event this week, there's a long history of contact with UFOs, and really that was ground zero for UFOs back in the day with George Van Tassel at Giant Rock and the Integratron and that whole area. And also we look at somebody like, California is a hotbed, Southern California, with Jack Parsons,
Yes.
who was a pioneering rocket scientist and helped found JPL. He was also a ritual magician, prodigy of Aleister Crowley, and
Nonetheless,
he and the future founder of L. Ron Hubbard around 1946, this was long before Scientology, he and Hubbard became associated and started a magical working called the Babylon working, the intent of which was to call down a child and bring it into the womb of a woman. They would produce the magical child. Anyway, during the course of all this stuff going on, they were conducting a ritual in the Mojave Desert. As legend goes, you know, there's a lot of legends surrounding these things where they came in contact. And I've heard different stories, but it appeared to be ETs. They perceived them as ETs, maybe Venusians. This was 1946, so this is one of the legends in ufology. Look at 1946. The following year is when Kenneth Arnold had his sightings over Washington State, which started the modern era of UFOs, and some suggest that Hubbard and Parsons opened up some portal that allowed these critters to fly in. 47 was also the Roswell crash, whatever that actually really was.
yeah. I've heard also as well, some people have said that that Parsons was a contemporary, God, I'm spacing on his name, the gentleman who just had the flying saucer over the Washington Mountains that we just mentioned. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I'm spacing on his name.
I know Kenneth Arnold.
Kenneth Arnold. Is that true that Parsons and Arnold were flying buddies?
I probably started that rumor, or well, no, there's possibly some truth to it. I not started the rumor, but helped promote it.
Yeah.
And where did I first hear about that? Perhaps in Sex and Rockets is a book about Jack Parsons by Farrell House. And actually where I first heard that was from the conspiracy researcher John Judge, passed on a couple of years ago. And his take on UFOs was that it was a government cover-up, basically to conceal the testing of secret craft, and that Arnold and Parsons were flying partners.
Right.
I went, wow.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. I contacted John Judge a couple of years ago before he died, and I asked him, where did you get that information at? And he goes, it's kind of vague, or he wasn't sure. Well, I in that Sex and Rockets book, I go, no, I heard you said that like 3 or 4 years before that, and I'm trying to figure out where this came from. And he could never tell me conclusively. Maybe somebody passed it along to him, so I haven't found anything to confirm it.
Interesting.
No, it's a great story.
It is. Let's roll back a little bit. Shadow Over Susana, let's take a look at this. You have written what some people consider to be the book on the Manson family and the murders. And this is even above Bugliosi's Helter Skelter. It's this book here, which you also see right there. Manson and his family spent time in the desert. Here again, we're back to the desert. Talk a little bit about this. And one of the things that you brought up, I am not a person who was enamored with Manson. We discussed this earlier. I never really followed the whole Manson story. But one thing you mentioned in the books is that he was really into coyotes, which I find interesting. He's a bit coyote-like.
He tuned into nature. Yeah, they felt that he associated himself with the coyote, the lone outsider out there in the wilderness, you know, that sometimes they'll gather into packs and go raid whatever they can. But yeah, and that coyotes were, they had a higher level of awareness, and that's what he promoted when they got out to the desert, that the paranoia started creeping in, but that paranoia could be a good thing. It gave you a higher, higher awareness. Paranoia was a higher form of awareness, and so yeah, Manson identified with the coyote. He called that coyote noia.
Right.
Getting in that mind space.
Well, I was never aware of that. When I read it in Happy Trails, I was like, actually, I can kind of see that. And coyotes are wily animals. But here's where here's what I don't understand. This continued fascination with Manson, and you and I have discussed this. I mean, just this week, I believe, a new David Duchovny television show called Aquarius has come out with the Manson kind of backdrop. Mm-hmm. What is it about the Manson family and those murders that continue to entrance the population, or is it just Hollywood that's entranced?
Yeah, I think it's media partly. That Manson was the poster child for the end of the 60s. Everything, right. All the hopes and aspirations, the idealism, in some people's mind took a great blow, you know, and it signaled the end of the 60s. So there's that in the public consciousness. And he was this charismatic figure with these young ladies were drawn to him. So there's continuing fascination there. In the mid-70s, there was a great mini-series right. on the Manson family, and that's what first drew me to it. Yeah, and every few years you have these television programs. So it's a combination of these things, you know, and Manson certainly has done nothing over the years to try to diminish his powers, you know.
Right. Well, you and I, another thing we were discussing, because people always ask you, I've been listening to a lot of your interviews, and the thing that a lot of people want to know was Manson some form of agent? And personally, I'm dubious of that. Mm-hmm. However, I don't really know, but it just seems to me like, and I want to hear your feedback on this, it seems to me like if he were an agent of some intelligence group, he's had 50 years behind bars to come clean. I would think the guy would want to get out, but you kind of put the point quite well. It's like most of his life he spent in bars. Mm-hmm. What do you see to the whole argument that he was an agent of some sort?
Well, I'm not totally convinced one way or the other, but that's one of the reasons I got into this book, because there were so many conspiracy theories surrounding right. Manson, and some of them make a certain amount of sense. There was a fellow named Preston Guillory who worked for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office back in the day when Manson was at Spawn Ranch. And he later came out and said, and this was an interview to the conspiracy researcher Mae Brussel, that they'd been told to keep hands off of Manson, even though they knew some shady stuff was going on at Spawn Ranch, and he was on parole, but he had underage women. There was some charges of rape. They had weapons, and so
certainly drugs.
Oh yes, and they were dealing drugs, and so you know the story has been, or the theory has been over the years, that he was some type of agent provocateur. And this was around the 68 or so, when the government had the COINTEL program, counterintelligence, where they groomed agent provocateurs and put them in different cults, hippie communes, sure. such as the Manson. Monitored, the Black Panther movement, and basically undermined the Black Panther. And so some suggest this was Manson's role, that he was some type of provocateur, FBI informant, that they were using him.
I guess
a lot of things point to this, but we have no smoking gun to really say for sure,
I consider you an authority on Manson. In your heart, your gut, what was the deal with this guy? I mean, was he just a bad dude? I mean, or was there, what do you feel was going on with this guy?
He wasn't a good dude.
No, he wasn't a good dude.
Did he actually get blood on his hands? No. Was he, did he order the murders or had a role in them? Definitely, but he, for anybody who didn't actually commit a murder but was involved in a murder conspiracy, they would have been out of prison years and years ago. But once right. again, he was the poster child of everything that went bad. And also he had connections deep in the music industry, Hollywood, and some suggest that the reason Bugliosi came up with the whole helter-skelter theory and all of this was to basically wind up the case real fast and minimize or put a blanket of silence over the involvement with all the people he knew in Hollywood and the music industry.
Well, our very first episode of Antidote, we had a person you and I both admire greatly, David McGowan, and he talked in his book, Weird Scenes, about the access that Manson had to the Hollywood crowd, and he certainly had great access. I've heard other people say that they don't think that's crazy, you know, that if you were a wandering hippie, it would have been easy. I don't know. Regardless, the man was held in some esteem by people like Neil Young and Dennis Wilson and guys like that.
Yeah.
So he had some friends in high places, many of whom I'm sure want to distance themselves from him now. But moving on, because he's not the only crazy cat we're dealing with.
Let's just say he had drugs and young ladies, so that provided easy entrance. And that scene back in that era was wide open.
Absolutely.
It changed after the murders, you know.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he had the things that these types of people would have wanted at parties. And he was a musician, an aspiring musician. Anyway, but getting back to our idea of California and this arid state that we're in, just being a haven for a lot of crazy folks, let's go back out to the desert for just a second. You have been to Giant Rock and you've been to the Integratron. I've interviewed George Van Tassel's nephew earlier this past year. Tell me a little bit about your experiences out at Giant Rock.
Well, yeah, I first became interested when I started hearing the history about Giant Rock, and in a nutshell, George Van Tassel went out there. He worked for Hughes Aircraft and different aviation, but he got tired of the rat race and the corporate 9-to-5 job. And
He lived in Santa Monica, right? I think for a bit.
yeah, I believe so. So for some reason, he just went out to the desert and they found this rock. Actually, he had a friend of his, Kritzer, who actually lived there before him under the rock. Kritzer is a whole different story, and there's a lady named Barbara Harris that can tell you a lot about that. But anyway, so Van Tassel went out there and set up an airport at the rock. It was a landing strip, Giant Rock Airport. And they also had a room under Giant Rock where they did a lot of channelings of the aliens. And
this is the 50s, right?
this was the 50 and 52 at Giant Rock. Yeah, George Van Tassel had his vision. He was contacted by Venusians or an entity named Solganda or who knows, but who instructed him to build the Integratron,
Right.
which nowadays looks kind of like a wacky observatory. And it was the ultimate thing this was going to do was be a rejuvenation machine that could turn back aging or stop aging. And so people started flocking out there to meet George Van Tassel, this guy who was channeling aliens. And they started having spacecraft conferences out there back in the day. And within a few years, they're getting 2,000 to 3,000 contactees showing up. So that became ground zero for the contactee movement. And so, of course, yeah, I was interested and have gone out there a number of occasions to visit Giant Rock and the Integratron. There's a lot of great history there.
The Integratron, so did you go in that and experience one of the sound baths? I think you mentioned that you did.
I have done that, which is pretty awesome. They do they play bowls. You know how that works?
Tibetan bowls?
Yeah. You rub them and they give different frequencies, and that puts you in one of those ohms-like state of minds. I've also played music up on in the top of the Integratron. And the acoustics of the building, there's something unique about it. Amazing acoustics.
I believe it's all wood. They didn't use any iron nails, correct?
Entirely constructed of wood. And there's also crystal caverns and such underneath, so they think, you know, this is one of those areas where there's a lot of
ley lines?
earth energies
Sure.
or whatever, a magical spot, which might be one of the other reasons that supposedly there's been so many UFO sightings going on out there. Of course, there's a military base nearby as well.
Is that
so
China Lake or
29 Palms
29
has
Palms?
it.
So these days, the Integratron, I think it's run by perhaps a couple of sisters or something, and they're doing more of kind of what I think is Van Tassel's original intention as a healing facility, correct?
They've gone in a little bit of different direction than Van Tassel, but yeah, that's what it's used for up on top of the Integratron, the healing baths with the bowls that make the sound, and they have a lot of different events and things going on there. I'm trying to remember. The sisters' names are Carl, Nancy, and I have a senior moment there, but yeah, those are the ladies who run the Integratron these days.
Well, it's an interesting place. I've definitely got to get out there at some point. But yeah, you mentioned that was back in the 50s, Giant Rock, and this adjacent were kind of...
Nancy and Joanne Carl are the sisters' names, yeah, sorry about that.
Was the place where they had many of these UFO abductee festivals, and Adamski and all these folks would come out there. And how many people did you say used to attend these? I mean, it was big crowds.
At the height, I've heard numbers up to 5,000, which was, it was very, back then, remote, and you didn't have facilities, really. It was just a bunch of people meeting out there.
Waiting for the Space Brothers.
Yeah, in the desert, and that's where the who's who of the contactee scene. I mean, a lot of your viewers might not be up on contactee history, but all of them, George Adamski and Truman Betheron, all the stars of the contactee world then would go out every year. It was a big thing. And it started to, as time progressed, kind of faded away, and there was even kind of more of a psychedelic scene that happened there towards the end. You
Makes
had
sense.
that influence going on. And then in 1977, Van Tassel was here in LA to be filmed on a television show, and he was claiming that the Integratron was almost completed and he was going to be the first subject. And there was some inner workings, mechanical inner workings that were supposed to be in the Integratron, and blueprints as well. And Van Tassel died, what some say was a sudden death. Some people suspect he was murdered or something. I don't know about that, but apparently all his blueprints and the inner workings of the Integratron disappeared at that point as well. It's one of these UFO legends.
Well, one last thing I want to touch on about Giant Rock before we move on is there's always the specter of Howard Hughes over this thing. And apparently Howard Hughes would fly in because they've got this little dirt airway. And I guess there was a little cafeteria there, and he would fly in and have pie, ostensibly.
Exactly, yeah, that's a true story. Yeah, you can see some of the old pictures. It was just a little shack near Giant Rock, and they had a little restaurant there, and Van Tassel's wife supposedly made the greatest apple pie in the world. And yeah, and Howard Hughes on occasion would just fly in there and say hi and have some apple pie. And
fascinating. Well, we touched on Jack Parsons a little bit, so I think I'm going to move on. One of your other books, you actually have two books, on this gentleman, Kerry Thornley. Now, this was not a person that I was aware of until I learned about you. And Kerry Thornley, if I got this straight, young man, high school student, Whittier, California, with a buddy, Greg Hill. They go to the bowling alley, as one does.
there they are.
Nice, clean-cut Americans. They go to the bowling alley, which, depending on the store, you can either get coffee at or beer or both. And they dream up a fake religion.
Or it was revealed to them, or yeah, they discovered or had a vision. Or
Well, talk about that. Tell us, for the people out there who don't know what Discordianism is and who this gentleman right here is, tell us a little bit about this.
Kerry Thornley there and Greg Hill. So
Yes.
they've been described by people who I know as, who knew them at that time as free-thinking nerds. They were a couple of oddballs, and actually they got involved. They had an interesting crackpot cults they used to visit. Who knows, they might have gone out to Giant Rock at some time. But they'd meet in a bowling alley and have philosophical conversations about all kinds of things under the sun. And at one point it got around to, why is there so much chaos in the world, you know? And you have all these deities that supposedly religious deities that bring order, but it doesn't seem to work. Maybe order is just man's perception, or trying to order a chaotic universe that we're never going to really be able to bring true order in. What we need, Kerry said, Thornley, is our own religion dedicated to chaos. And Greg Hill said, you know, there already is a god or a goddess named Eris in Greek mythology, and she's the goddess of chaos and discord. And they said, hot damn, let's start a religion. It was basically a spoof religion to poke fun at major religions and just kind of goof off. And it eventually evolved into the Bible of Discordia, Principia Discordia, which evolved over the years with a number of people who got involved in Discordianism, like Robert Anton Wilson, Robert Shea, and Principia Discordia became a huge influence on the Illuminatus. And Discordianism, oddly enough, is, this started as an in-joke between a few friends. Nowadays, if you get on the internet, you'll see there's thousands of Discordians worldwide. These guys had no idea that a spoof religion would...
So people take this seriously, or they're just playing along?
Discordians are all different. You shouldn't take it too seriously.
Right.
But then again, Thornley, interesting character. He met Oswald in the Marines. This was 58 is when they discovered Discordianism. In 59, he met Lee Harvey Oswald in the Marines.
Ladies and gentlemen, hold on. This guy right here met Lee Harvey Oswald in the Marines. It gets crazier from here on out. Keep going.
So Thornley, he was a budding writer, and he started working on a book called The Idle Warriors, being in the military during the Cold War period, and started working on this book, and it was based on composite characters of himself. Oswald, he had known Oswald a couple months, was intrigued by him, and other Marines were the composite characters. So
was this at El Toro?
El Toro, where he met. So Thornley goes to Japan, and he's working on this book, and it's when he gets over to Japan at Atsugi, he hears that Oswald has defected to Russia, and at that time, Thornley decides, wow, great story, I'm going to base this book entirely on Oswald. So he's writing a book about Oswald 3 years before the Kennedy assassination. Thornley went on to testify before the Warren Commission about knowing Oswald, and in early 1968, Garrison started his investigation and claimed that Kerry Thornley was a diabolical CIA agent. He was one of the notorious Oswald doubles running around pretending to be Oswald. Basically was part of some JFK assassination conspiracy. Of course, Thornley denied all of this, but in later years he began to suspect that maybe worshiping the goddess of chaos and discord wasn't the wisest thing.
And if I understand this correctly, the CIA or the FBI thought that the whole Discordian society was some form of intelligence front. Is that correct?
Not quite. Thornley was in Garrison's crosshairs. That was one of the people Garrison was going after. And Garrison had a lot of independent investigators showing up there, offering their services, volunteers. And one of them was this John Birch Society guy named Alan Chapman, who claimed, among other things, his theory was the Bavarian Illuminati was involved in some way in the JFK assassination. When Thornley heard this, he thought it was hilarious, and maybe they could pull a Discordian prank on Garrison, so they came up with their own fake letterhead saying, members of the Bavarian Illuminati, the world's oldest and most successful secret society. And they adopted Discordian Illuminati names, and they started sending prank letters to Garrison saying, well, we didn't actually come here we didn't assassinate Kennedy, we've come here to illuminate you all. And it was a prank, but then Garrison got a hold of this, and other investigators like, what's going on here? What's with this Discordian society? And they figured out Thornley's Discordian name was Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. Well, that's Thornley, and they started putting this together and Garrison had a lot of far out ideas. He connected a lot of things that really couldn't really connect unless you projected onto them, but he began to suspect that the Discordian Society was some sort of CIA front organization that was involved in the JFK assassination.
This is just crazy. 2 high school kids in Whittier in a bowling alley.
You can't make this stuff up.
Create a fake religion. Next thing you know, one of them is spending time with Lee Harvey Oswald, and then becomes entangled in the whole JFK conspiracy.
The weird thing, there was all these synchronicities because Thornley moved to New Orleans in the early 60s where the hotbed of all that stuff was going on. All the people Garrison said was involved, Clay Shaw, Bannister, David Ferry. And at one time or another, by happenstance or whatever, Thornley crossed paths with all these people. Later, he suspected that somebody might have been setting him up by putting him in proximity with all these supposed people involved in the JFK assassination.
We're going to kind of roll down on the remainder of the show. What are you up to right now? What are you working on right now? Can you tell us?
One of my big projects, it involves Discordianism, and there's 3 books. This was the first book, Prankster and the Conspiracy. It's kind of like a trilogy, then Historia Discordia, Origins of the Discordian Society, and this latest one, Caught in the Crossfire, that gets more into the Jim Garrison investigation. So I got into looking at all this stuff, and there's some synchronicities involved in all of this, because in 2000, I got an email from a guy named Dr. Robert Newport. He informed me that Greg Hill had died in July of that year, and I go, this was at an email address. It was a private address. Nobody really knew except family and a couple friends. I didn't use it for my writing career, you know. It was just, anyway, I got an email from this guy. I didn't know who he was. I knew who Greg Hill was. We had a photo of him here in a sec, co-founder of Discordia. I asked him, well, did you know Kerry Thornley as well? Because I was interested in Thornley. I was starting to write a book at that period. And he goes, yeah, I knew Kerry Thornley. I went to high school with him and Greg Hill. In fact, I'm one of the 3rd founding members of Discordianism. Wow, that's interesting. So became friends with him. And he showed me at one point what he called the Discordian Archives armload of materials, which I scanned and ended up using a lot for this first book. And I thought that was the extent of the Discordian Archives. So it turned out, and a few years later, I kept asking, well, maybe I'd like to do a larger book on Discordian history, and can I still use your materials? And he said, yeah, but next time you come down in LA, come down, I'll give you everything, which turned out to be several boxes of material that have led to different book projects, and some things in there that people consider like the Holy Grail of Discordianism, the original copy of the Principia Discordia. But anyway, I asked Newport again in 2009, how did you know to contact me? And he said, I have no idea how that all came about. So there's been a lot of those odd synchronicities that have led to my involvement in this stuff, you know.
Amazing. Wow, that's very weird. He contacted you, but he doesn't know how or why.
No, and admittedly, he's a little older, so, but I have no idea to figure it out. Maybe he's a CIA agent I don't know about, or one of those type of things that...
That is very strange. One of the last things I wanted to say is, and I mentioned it earlier, but a person that you and I both admire, Dave McGowan, he was the first guest ever on Antidote. I got a lot of love for Dave. He is a great guy, and he is currently not in good health. And so we would just like to ask everybody out there, if you can, say a little prayer or meditate, however you do, send Dave McGowan some good vibes. He's dealing with some serious health issues. I love his work. He's a good guy. And you and I know have spoken about him. So just think about Dave. We love you, brother. I hope you pull through on this. So you didn't really tell me what all you're up to. You told me that you're working on this. Is there anything else that you're doing? I mean, if you can't tell, that's cool.
I was getting to it. There's a website called Historia Discordia that people ought to check out if they're into this stuff.
We're going to put all your links below.
And a couple of UFO-related projects, but I
Cool. Good.
don't want to talk too much about them because they're in development, and sometimes these things fall through or take a number of years. But yeah, I'm staying busy writing. Yeah, and a couple, we talked a little bit about the Roswell Slides. I have a blog at gorightly.wordpress.com. There's a couple posts there about the Roswell Slides if people want to dig into that craziness.
Yeah, there's 2 of those articles. They're out there. Take a look at them. If you haven't caught up on the whole Roswell slide thing, Adam's got some great articles on that. We are going to wrap this thing up. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. We wish you continued luck. I mean, you are a hard-working writer, brother. A lot of work here. Next week, we're going to be, our guest in the studio will be Zoltan Istvan. He is the transhumanist presidential candidate and the founder of the Transhumanist Political Party. So that's going to be next week. My name is Michael Parker. Until next week, remember, you, me, we, all of us together, we are the antidote.